Ladies and gentlemen, we live in an age saturated with information, yet starved for wisdom, overwhelmed by motion, yet lacking meaningful progress. Never before has humanity had such access to tools, data, and opportunity, and never before has focus been so rare. The battlefield of our generation is not merely external, it is internal. It is the arena of the mind. Every habit you possess, every result you tolerate, every future you move toward began as a thought you allowed to remain unchallenged. Productivity is not a matter of busyness. It is alignment. It is the intentional ordering of thought, time, and energy toward a purpose that transcends impulse. An undisciplined mind reacts. A trained mind responds. One drifts with circumstances. The other navigates by principle. The difference between long-term success and chronic frustration is not intelligence, talent, or resources. It is governance of the inner life. What you repeatedly think upon, you eventually believe. What you believe, you act upon. And what you act upon, over time, becomes your destiny. The mind, left unattended, will default to distraction, comfort, and immediacy. But when trained, deliberately, patiently, and consistently, it becomes a powerful instrument capable of focus, endurance, and sustained success. Tonight, we are not here to chase motivation. We are here to establish order. Because when the mind is trained, productivity is no longer forced. It becomes inevitable. Productivity does not begin with calendars, applications, or systems. It begins in the invisible architecture of the mind long before a single action is taken. Every outward result is merely the visible shadow of an inward process. What you see manifested in behavior was first conceived, entertained, and rehearsed internally. Thought precedes action with absolute consistency. There are no exceptions. If productivity is absent in life, it is not because effort is lacking, but because order has not yet been established at the level of thinking. The mind is not a neutral environment. It is either being trained intentionally or shaped passively by whatever is allowed to enter it. Ideas do not knock politely before settling in. They occupy space, influence direction, and demand expression. The thoughts you tolerate today will govern the actions you justify tomorrow. This is why true productivity cannot be engineered from the outside inward. External structures collapse when internal discipline is missing. You cannot out-organize a disordered mind. Most people attempt to change outcomes without examining origins. They adjust routines, chase motivation, and adopt methods, yet never confront the source from which all motion flows. The unseen always precedes the seen. Long before productivity appears as consistency, it exists as clarity. Long before discipline shows itself in habits, it exists as conviction. Long before focus is demonstrated in action, it exists as intention. What is undefined in thought will be unstable in execution. The mind functions like a command center. Every signal sent outward originates there. If the signals are fragmented, contradictory, or impulsive, the results will reflect that confusion. Productivity requires coherence. It demands that thought be aligned with purpose, values, and direction. When the mind lacks this alignment, effort becomes scattered. Energy is spent without progress, movement occurs without advancement, and activity replaces effectiveness. An untrained mind is reactive by nature. It responds to stimuli rather than operating by principle. Notifications dictate attention. Emotions dictate decisions. Urgency replaces importance. In such a state, productivity becomes accidental rather than intentional. Work is driven by pressure instead of purpose. The individual becomes busy but ineffective, exhausted yet unfulfilled. This is not a failure of capability, it is a failure of governance. Training the mind means establishing authority over what is allowed to occupy attention. Not every thought deserves consideration. Not every idea warrants rehearsal. Focus is not about forcing concentration, but about eliminating competitors for attention. When the mind is cluttered with trivialities, it lacks the bandwidth for meaningful work. Clarity emerges not from adding more inputs, but from removing distractions that dilute intentional thought. Productivity born from a trained mind is calm, deliberate, and sustainable. It does not rely on adrenaline or external pressure. It flows from internal order. The individual knows why they act, not merely what they are doing. Purpose acts as a filter, rejecting distractions that do not align with long-term objectives. This internal framework reduces decision fatigue and preserves energy for work that matters. The unseen work of thinking is often neglected because it produces no immediate applause. Yet it is the most critical labor of all. Discipline at the level of thought requires patience and honesty. It requires confronting assumptions, challenging mental habits, and rejecting comfort-driven narratives. But once established, it creates momentum that no external system can replicate. Every meaningful achievement is preceded by a season of mental preparation. Long before progress is visible, direction is determined internally. Productivity, therefore, is not a technique to be mastered, but a consequence of a mind brought into order. When thinking is disciplined, action follows naturally. When the inner life is aligned, outward effectiveness becomes not a struggle, but a certainty. Focus is often misunderstood as a natural trait rather than a cultivated discipline. Many assume that distraction is an external problem caused by noise, interruptions, or technology. In reality, distraction is an internal permission granted to whatever competes for attention. The mind does not lose focus accidentally. It relinquishes it gradually. What appears as an inability to concentrate is usually the result of untrained attention and undefined priorities. Attention is the most valuable currency a person possesses. Where it is invested determines what grows and what decays. When attention is fragmented, effort becomes diluted. Tasks begin but are not completed. Intentions are formed but not executed. The mind jumps from stimulus to stimulus, mistaking responsiveness for productivity. In such a state, movement replaces progress, and urgency replaces importance. Focus is not achieved by eliminating all distractions, but by deciding in advance what deserves attention. Without deliberate choice, the mind defaults to whatever is loudest, easiest, or most emotionally stimulating. This is why an untrained mind is easily hijacked by novelty. It confuses the immediate with the important and sacrifices long-term outcomes for short-term relief. Discipline of attention requires intentional resistance. It demands the ability to remain with a task even when novelty fades and discomfort arises. True focus often feels ordinary, even tedious, because it lacks the emotional spikes that distraction provides. Yet it is precisely this sustained engagement that produces meaningful results. Progress is rarely dramatic in the moment, but its accumulation over time is transformative. A disciplined mind understands the difference between urgency and significance. Urgent matters shout for attention, significant matters wait quietly. Without focus, life becomes a reaction to demands rather than a pursuit of purpose. Time is spent responding instead of building. Energy is consumed by maintenance rather than advancement. Focus restores hierarchy to attention, placing what matters most above what merely insists. The practice of focus also requires restraint in thought. The mind constantly generates possibilities, worries, and impulses. Without boundaries, these internal distractions can be as disruptive as external ones. Learning to redirect thought, rather than indulge it, is essential. Focus is strengthened not by force, but by repeated choice. Each time attention is returned to its intended object, discipline is reinforced. Focus is cumulative. Small, consistent acts of attention compound into mastery. Just as physical strength is built through repetition, mental endurance is built through sustained engagement. The mind adapts to what it is trained to do. If trained to wander, it will wander effortlessly. If trained to remain, it will develop the capacity to stay present even under pressure. Long-term success depends on this capacity. Grand visions fail not because they are unrealistic, but because attention is insufficient to carry them through time. Focus bridges the gap between intention and completion. It transforms potential into output and plans into results. Ultimately, focus is an act of self-respect. It is the refusal to squander one's limited cognitive resources on what does not contribute to purpose. By disciplining attention, the individual reclaims agency over their time and direction. Productivity, then, becomes not a frantic pursuit, but the natural outcome of deliberate, sustained focus. The mind, much like the body, follows the law of use. What is exercised strengthens. What is neglected weakens. Left untrained, the mind does not remain neutral or idle. It deteriorates into disorder. It gravitates toward ease, distraction, and repetition of familiar patterns. Chaos is not introduced. It emerges naturally when discipline is absent. This is why productivity cannot be sustained without intentional mental training. Willpower alone is insufficient. Without structure, effort eventually collapses. An untrained mind resists difficulty. It seeks comfort and avoids sustained effort. not because the individual lacks capacity, but because the mind has not been conditioned to endure resistance. Just as muscles protest when first exposed to strain, the mind rebels when asked to focus beyond its habitual limits. This resistance is not a signal to stop. It is evidence that training has begun. Mental training requires consistency rather than intensity. Occasional bursts of focus do not produce lasting discipline. The mind adapts to what it encounters repeatedly. When patterns of thought are reinforced daily, they become automatic. This is both the danger and the opportunity. Negative habits form effortlessly through repetition, but so do constructive ones when intentionally practiced. Training the mind involves establishing routines that remove ambiguity. When decisions are minimized, execution becomes easier. Productivity thrives in environments where expectations are clear and choices are limited. The mind wastes enormous energy debating what to do next when structure is absent. Training replaces indecision with default behaviors aligned to purpose. The mind also requires resistance to grow. Avoiding difficulty weakens mental resilience. Productivity demands the ability to work through boredom, uncertainty, and delay. These are not obstacles to success. They are the very conditions under which discipline is formed. When the mind learns that discomfort is not dangerous, it stops retreating from effort. Mental training includes deliberate exposure to deep work. Shallow engagement conditions the mind for constant stimulation and immediate reward. Over time, this erodes the capacity for sustained concentration. Deep, uninterrupted effort retrains attention, restoring the ability to think sequentially and thoroughly. This is essential for meaningful productivity, which rarely occurs in fragmented moments. Without training, the mind becomes reactive. External events dictate internal states. Productivity rises and falls based on mood, energy, or circumstances. With training, the mind becomes directive. Action is guided by commitment rather than emotion. This shift is subtle but decisive. The trained mind acts because it has decided, not because it feels inspired. Mental discipline also strengthens identity. What a person repeatedly does becomes part of how they see themselves. A mind trained for consistency begins to expect progress. Excuses lose credibility, standards rise, productivity becomes part of character rather than a temporary effort. The chaos of an untrained mind is not dramatic, it is quiet and gradual. It appears as procrastination, inconsistency, and unfinished intentions. Over time, this erosion produces frustration and self-doubt. Training reverses this process. Each completed task reinforces trust in one's capacity to follow through. Ultimately, the mind will obey whatever system it is given. If that system is disorder, results will reflect it. If that system is discipline, productivity will follow. Training the mind is not an abstract concept. It is a practical necessity. Without it, chaos governs by default. With it, progress becomes predictable, sustainable, and intentional. Short-term impulses are among the most subtle yet destructive forces in the pursuit of long-term success. They present themselves as immediate gratification, emotional reactions, or urgent distractions, and they often feel compelling, even reasonable. The mind, untrained and reactive, treats these impulses as commands, allowing the fleeting to dictate the direction of effort. Over time, the accumulation of these small, unexamined choices can erode vision, derail goals, and produce results far below potential. The battle for productivity is not fought in grand gestures, but in these countless moments of internal surrender. Impulse is seductive because it appeals to instinct and emotion rather than reason. It is easier to follow the path of least resistance than to invest energy in what requires patience and persistence. Yet, yielding to immediacy carries hidden costs. Every choice made without deliberation subtracts from the time, energy, and clarity needed for significant long-term achievement. Productivity is not measured by moments of pleasure or relief, but by consistent progress toward meaningful objectives. The allure of impulse can blind the mind to this reality, making the short term feel urgent while the long term slips quietly into neglect. The challenge of overcoming impulses begins with awareness. Most individuals are not conscious of how frequently they allow reactions to dictate actions. Thoughts that arise spontaneously often go unexamined, and feelings are interpreted as imperatives. Without recognition, impulses are permitted to govern daily life. This is why self-reflection and mindfulness are foundational practices in cultivating a productive mind. Recognizing impulses is the first step in choosing not to act upon them. Discipline is the mechanism by which the mind resists the tyranny of the immediate. It is not suppression, but regulation, a conscious decision to align action with principle rather than passing desire. The disciplined mind assesses the long-term impact of each choice, even when the short-term beckons. This requires mental clarity, patience, and repeated practice. Each instance of resistance strengthens the ability to act according to vision rather than whim, gradually conditioning the mind to prefer what contributes to enduring success over what provides temporary comfort. Long-term success is cumulative, built from consistent, purposeful actions over time. Impulses threaten this accumulation by introducing variability, inconsistency, and distraction. Small concessions, repeated daily, compound into habits that either advance or derail goals. Productivity is therefore less about occasional bursts of effort and more about the cumulative effect of deliberate choices. Every decision to defer impulse in favor of intentional action strengthens the infrastructure of long-term achievement. Another critical aspect of managing impulses is prioritization. Not all immediate desires are inherently negative, but they must be weighed against strategic objectives. The mind must learn to distinguish between what is urgent and what is important. Urgency often masquerades as significance, tempting individuals to divert resources from their primary goals. Discipline trains the mind to recognize these deceptions, ensuring that attention and energy are reserved for what truly matters. Finally, resisting short-term impulses cultivates a sense of inner authority. The mind becomes the master of its own decisions, rather than a servant to fleeting moods or external pressures. This autonomy fosters confidence, persistence, and resilience, the qualities that underpin sustained productivity. A person who consistently chooses long-term benefit over immediate gratification not only accomplishes more, but also experiences a profound sense of control over life's trajectory. In conclusion, the mind's default response to short-term impulses is natural, but ultimately destructive. To achieve meaningful long-term success, one must develop the capacity to recognize, assess, and regulate these impulses. Discipline is not a restriction, it is the tool by which freedom and productivity are realized. Every deliberate choice against fleeting desire strengthens the foundation upon which enduring achievement is built. By mastering this inner battlefield, the individual ensures that progress is not left to chance, but guided by vision, purpose, and unwavering intention. Discipline is often misunderstood as a harsh or joyless imposition, but in truth, it is a form of self-governance rooted in clarity and conviction. It is the framework through which the mind, emotions, and actions are aligned to achieve meaningful objectives. Without discipline, intention is powerless and talent is squandered. Even the most brilliant plans fail when the individual lacks the ability to consistently do what is necessary rather than what is easy. Discipline is not merely following rules, it is the conscious decision to subordinate immediate impulses to long-term purpose. Emotional comfort is the natural adversary of discipline. The mind seeks relief, pleasure, and avoidance of discomfort. Every shortcut or indulgence promises immediate satisfaction, but erodes progress over time. Discipline acts as a counterbalance, establishing boundaries that protect time, energy, and attention. It does not eliminate desire or feeling, but it trains the mind to prioritize action over emotion. Those who rely solely on motivation or inspiration will find themselves at the mercy of fluctuating moods. Discipline ensures that action occurs even when enthusiasm wanes. Self-governance requires repeated choice. Every moment presents a crossroads between convenience and commitment. Skipping a task, delaying a responsibility, or indulging in distraction may feel insignificant in isolation, but these small decisions accumulate into character and destiny. Discipline is built in these daily repetitions. It is less about dramatic victories and more about consistent adherence to principle. A disciplined person understands that greatness is the sum of small, intentional actions performed over time. Discipline also creates freedom. At first, it may appear restrictive because it demands sacrifice. Yet paradoxically, those who are disciplined gain control over their time, their priorities, and ultimately their lives. Without discipline, life is reactive, shaped by circumstance and impulse. With discipline, life becomes proactive, guided by vision and anchored in purpose. The more one exercises restraint, the less one is enslaved by momentary desire, and the greater the ability to pursue meaningful goals without interference. A disciplined mind distinguishes between what is urgent and what is important. The world constantly demands attention, often shouting for reaction, yet meaningful progress requires the ability to resist distraction. Discipline allows the individual to focus on what advances long-term objectives rather than what merely demands immediate response. This prioritization is not instinctive, it is learned. It grows stronger through repeated acts of deliberate choice, reinforcing the capacity to act consistently in alignment with purpose. Self-discipline is also intimately tied to integrity. It is the ability to do what is right even when no one is watching, to keep commitments to oneself, and to maintain standards regardless of circumstance. Those who cultivate discipline develop internal authority, reducing dependence on external enforcement or validation. In this way, discipline is as much a moral exercise as it is a practical one, shaping both results and character. The development of discipline is cumulative. One act reinforces another. Completing a challenging task strengthens the resolve to tackle the next. Delayed gratification becomes natural. Habits that once required effort eventually become automatic expressions of intent. The disciplined mind anticipates obstacles, navigates resistance, and persists where the undisciplined would falter. It transforms potential into performance and ideas into tangible outcomes. Ultimately, discipline is not merely a tool for productivity, it is the foundation for enduring success. Talent, opportunity, and resources may open doors, but without the consistent exercise of self-governance, they are wasted. The disciplined individual converts intention into action, aligns effort with purpose, and sustains momentum over the long term. This capacity to govern oneself is the difference between fleeting achievement and lasting impact, between chaos and order, between reaction and mastery. Discipline, therefore, is not optional for those who seek meaningful success. It is essential. True success is rarely instantaneous. It is not the result of luck, fleeting inspiration, or sudden breakthroughs. Rather, it is cumulative, built incrementally through consistent obedience to foundational principles over time. Every significant achievement rests on a series of small, deliberate choices made day after day. The individual who recognizes this truth approaches work and life differently, understanding that progress is not measured solely in dramatic milestones, but in steady, purposeful advancement. Long-term success is the natural outcome of sustained effort, guided by clarity, discipline, and intention. The world often glorifies quick wins and visible results, creating the illusion that success should be immediate. This misperception leads many to abandon worthwhile endeavors prematurely, frustrated by the slow pace of progress. In reality, meaningful outcomes require patience. They demand endurance, the ability to persist even when immediate gratification is absent. The person who embraces this truth understands that each disciplined act, though seemingly minor in isolation, compounds over time into momentum that becomes unstoppable. Consistency is the engine of long-term achievement. Repetition of positive actions, adherence to principle, and persistent cultivation of skill are the mechanisms by which the extraordinary is realized. While talent or intelligence may accelerate results, they cannot replace the steady application of effort. Habits formed in alignment with purpose produce results far beyond what bursts of effort can achieve. The individual who commits to foundational practices daily, regardless of circumstances or mood, accumulates advantage over those who rely on occasional inspiration. Patience and perseverance are inseparable from this process. Every path toward significant success includes obstacles, setbacks, and periods of apparent stagnation. These challenges are not signs of failure, but tests of resolve. How one responds to difficulty determines whether progress continues or stalls. Those who understand long-term success embrace resistance as a tool for refinement, recognizing that perseverance strengthens character and capability. Temporary discomfort becomes the cost of enduring gain. Long-term success is also rooted in principle rather than mere reaction. Individuals who build lasting impact operate from a framework of values that guide decisions, shape priorities, and determine how effort is applied. Without such a framework, action becomes reactive, scattered, and vulnerable to distraction. By contrast, a principle-centered approach provides clarity in moments of uncertainty and direction in times of complexity. It ensures that each step, no matter how small, contributes meaningfully to the overarching objective. Another key aspect of sustained success is the cultivation of self-awareness. Understanding one's strengths, weaknesses, and patterns of behavior allows for deliberate adjustment and growth. A person who reflects regularly on performance and habits can identify areas that require reinforcement and avoid repeating counterproductive actions. This ongoing refinement is essential for maintaining momentum and ensuring that effort consistently yields progress. Finally, long-term success demands resilience. Life is unpredictable, and challenges are inevitable. The capacity to recover from setbacks, learn from mistakes, and maintain commitment over years or decades differentiates those who achieve enduring results from those who fade under pressure. Resilience, like discipline, is cultivated through repeated exposure to challenge and a conscious choice to persist. Ultimately, long-term success is not accidental. It is the product of disciplined thought, focused attention, deliberate action, and unwavering commitment to principle. Each small decision, each repeated habit, each moment of perseverance builds a foundation for outcomes that endure. Success is not a fleeting moment of triumph, it is the accumulation of intentional choices and faithful execution over time. Those who understand this truth do not chase shortcuts or rely on luck. They invest daily, patiently, and persistently, knowing that the rewards of consistent effort are both inevitable and lasting. A renewed mind is the cornerstone of clarity, endurance, and purposeful action. It is not shaped by chance or circumstance, but by deliberate effort to align thought with principle, intention, and vision. Without renewal, the mind becomes reactive, distracted, and susceptible to short-term impulses that derail long-term objectives. True productivity, sustained focus, and meaningful success flow from a mind that has been disciplined, trained, and regularly refreshed. Renewal is not a single event. It is a continuous process that strengthens mental resilience and cultivates the capacity to navigate complexity with composure. The first step toward renewal is self-examination. The individual must honestly assess current thought patterns, identifying those that are unproductive, destructive, or misaligned with goals. Many people unknowingly allow habitual thought, fear, doubt, distraction, or impatience to dominate their decision-making. By bringing these patterns into awareness, the mind gains the opportunity to replace them with intentional, principle-driven thinking. This conscious adjustment forms the foundation for greater clarity, enabling decisions that are deliberate rather than reactive. A renewed mind is marked by the ability to prioritize effectively. Mental clutter, constant information, competing demands, and unnecessary worry erodes focus and drains energy. Renewal requires discernment, the ability to determine what deserves attention and what does not. This process strengthens mental endurance, allowing sustained engagement with tasks that contribute to long-term goals. It also diminishes susceptibility to the fleeting distractions and emotional impulses that commonly disrupt productivity. The disciplined mind remains steady, capable of navigating challenges without being derailed by noise or novelty. Endurance is cultivated as the mind becomes increasingly resilient. Life inevitably presents obstacles, setbacks, and periods of fatigue or frustration. Without mental renewal, these challenges are magnified, often leading to discouragement and impulsive decisions. A renewed mind, however, has the capacity to persist because it is anchored in purpose rather than immediate gratification. Clarity of thought reduces confusion, emotional regulation mitigates reactive impulses, and disciplined attention ensures that effort remains aligned with long-term objectives. The mind becomes a stable platform from which consistent, deliberate action emerges naturally. Renewal also enhances adaptability. A mind trapped in rigid or habitual thinking struggles to respond effectively to change. By contrast, a renewed mind remains flexible, capable of reassessing circumstances, incorporating new information, and adjusting strategies without losing sight of overarching goals. This flexibility is essential for long-term success as it prevents stagnation and enables continuous growth in an evolving environment. Adaptability and endurance are mutually reinforcing. A resilient mind can adjust without being shaken, and a flexible mind can maintain direction despite shifting circumstances. Purpose is clarified through renewal, A disciplined, trained mind allows the individual to see beyond immediate concerns to the broader trajectory of their life. The mental focus developed through renewal ensures that daily actions accumulate toward meaningful outcomes. Each thought is evaluated against long-term objectives, each decision measured against principle, and each effort reinforced by intentionality. Productivity becomes a natural consequence of clarity and alignment rather than forced effort. Finally, a renewed mind fosters consistency, the essential ingredient of lasting achievement. When thought is disciplined, distractions are minimized, and priorities are clear, sustained effort follows naturally. Daily choices reinforce purpose, build momentum, and gradually create the conditions for enduring success. Over time, the cumulative effect of this mental renewal is profound. The individual develops the clarity to make sound decisions, the endurance to persist through difficulty, and the capacity to focus on what truly matters. In conclusion, mental renewal is not a luxury, it is a necessity. It transforms reactive thinking into deliberate action, strengthens endurance against challenges, clarifies purpose, and enables focus to produce tangible results. A renewed mind is the invisible engine behind productivity, discipline, and long-term success. Those who invest in this ongoing process equip themselves not only to achieve goals, but to sustain them, navigating life with clarity, resilience, and unwavering direction.